Welcome everyone. We are here again with another panel in the competition of the age of business ecosystem. Now we are going to talk about staffing and sourcing, and I have three great people here that we are going to talk with. We have Ying McPherson, the Chief Strategy Officer of Unifi. We have Tom Gallo, that is the Head of Strategy and Innovation from ABM Industries. And Ayman Hamid, that is Executive Director of Global Business Services of Allegis Global Solutions. So let me start posing the context here and go one by one to see what you think. I mean, ecosystems is something that is been a long time in the staffing industry, but it created new formats when technology was being absorbed by the players. You have like the job boards, we have like more recently recruitment process outsourcing and vendor management systems. So a lot of things happening this time. My question to you is, what is the opportunity now, and what is different from the past? So I will start with you, Ayman, and after that we can go to Inc.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Claudio. I think you bring up a really good point. The evolution of the staffing industry in general is impacted greatly by technology. So you'd mentioned my role. I have global business services. What that means for us is I'm head of transformation as it relates to our technology. So what comes into play are these VMS systems, the many platforms out there around sourcing, the platforms around gig work, and how do you unify all of these new platforms in some sort of competitive ecosystem moving forward into the future. So when you ask about, do we see it being significant? Absolutely. I think companies that are able to adopt a strategy around an ecosystem and learning to compete with an ecosystem are going to be much more successful in the future versus the way many of the staffing companies have come up, which is the value prop around how they provided their service.
Well, no, thank you, Ayman. I mean, my question that come to you, Ing, right now is, how do you see that happening differently for organizations? What changed in the value chain that companies were not doing before and they have the opportunity to do right now?
Yeah, so what we haven't been able to do before that I believe the future is going to give us the opportunity to, with all this technology that gives us the access to this data that we haven't had before, right? So companies have had multiple ways of getting work done for the longest time, whether it's been strictly contingent work, statement of work, obviously the introduction of gig, and now with the data that we have, the ability to understand the actual capabilities that you have in your internal full-time workforce. So being able in the future, being able to leverage all of that to get work done in a different way is going to be critical. The game of simply hiring people just to get work done seems to be more and more challenging. I think we'd all agree is more and more challenging as we continue to move forward. So learning how to access the data and the information you have on your current workforce and the way that you acquire talent today and being able to leverage that to get work done in the future, I think is the path that many of us in the industry are trying to do, and many of the journeys that we're trying to lead our clients down to adopt that philosophy as it relates to the way work gets done.
Okay, so moving to Ing. Ing, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I think, I unify aviation. So everything we do is centered around airports. So our employees are more kind of in that, I would call the minimum wage class for the most part, maybe $1 or $2 before. So historically, we don't really even tap into a certain pool of potential candidates. So that's kind of just set the framework on what we do. I think today's environment, you have the technology, which has been coming, and we know it's going to continue to evolve. What's more challenging for us is the pandemic related, that's adding an additional layer. So if we think about the ecosystem, you have the components that make up the environment of the ecosystem, so to speak. I think our environment it's pretty traumatic experience, and it's putting a lot of pressure. So that environment has changed. For us, lots of regulations in terms of government subsidized fundings, as well as the change of different regulations. We also have a balance of union versus non-union environment that's also evolving a little bit. So I think our ecosystem is a little bit different than it was, call it pre-pandemic timeframe. Now there is the the underlying technology that's changing a lot of the way of thinking, speed to onboarding technology. And the candidates are also getting hit from multiple fronts, from multiple channels and multiple companies that may or may not be used to for them. So there's a lot of things are happening. I would say we're almost in a completely different ecosystem than we were 2 years ago, given some of the elements, but specifically related to the aviation industry. So I think lots of adjustment to be made, trying to figure out the best way to navigate, weed out some of the noise, the ones that are temporary, the ones that are permanent, that's really going to stick. And we're trying to be a little bit more mindful of how we look at staffing and not just looking at the temporary short-term gain, but more of what's sustainable in a longer-term approach. So I think we shuffled and evolved our strategy quite a bit in our specific industry.
That's interesting. I mean, it looks like the pandemic was an accelerator of things that were coming as well, but of course changed a bit the scenario as well. Let me hear you, Tom. How your take on this? The same question. How is that change? What's the opportunity here when you think about operating through ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, we have similar challenges to Ying. We have about 100,000 plus team members out there just in the United States alone, many of which are of the hourly variety, down from minimum wage up a little higher on the wage scale. So it spans the gamut in terms of skill level, janitors, engineers, right? There's a lot of different requirements there for hiring. I would say, one of the biggest things that we're focused on right now is the candidate experience. It's actually kind of the first look into your company, right? So if that experience is not good, the odds of them accepting the role and then actually showing up day one are probably not great. So, our focus is, how do we identify the right channels to communicate with the different types of candidates that we want to bring in for a particular role? That could mean anything from going to social media to hiring a firm like Allegis, I guess, right? Or actually just doing some grassroots recruiting, right? And having a barbecue and trying to get as many people to show up as possible. I mean, the environment's definitely changed, as Ying said, during the pandemic. I mean, we've had to go and do things that maybe we haven't done in years because we're just used to people showing up at the office to fill out an application. And that's really not the way it works anymore. So, the other thing I think that is just a really interesting cultural phenomenon that's changed the way that we go through this process is how easy it is to download an app onto your phone and open it up and with no instructions know exactly how to do what you downloaded it to do, right? And if you translate that expectation to, call it the corporate or employee environment, right? It's not always like that. So they immediately have an expectation that their experience should be the same as using their phone. And of course, the experience includes using the phone as we're trying to get to them through text and through other means that, are more, I guess, standard these days. But that expectation can be challenging to meet when you have a large enterprise, you're using enterprise software, right? But you're trying to meet the need of the candidate where they are.
I love that. I mean, and I see that more and more companies are concerned about like the hiring, the whole experience of the employee or the temporary worker. My question, that come back to you, Ying, before I go to Ayman, is there is how does it work? Because there is this whole competition about giving the best experience and bringing people in, but you have like, for example, what people are calling the Great Resignation, where there is a scarcity of people to find, and there are a lot of people trying to get into the same people. How you're handling that? What is, how do you see that right now?
Yeah, I think very similar to Tom's challenge. I'm sure we share a lot of commonalities from that perspective. I think for us, the added challenge is our employee candidate pool is different today than it was before. So it's almost like at the beginning of 2020, the people that are very sensitive to the elements left work first, right? And they are the last to come back. And you have what you have preserved, which are probably your best employees if they're not there for the wrong reasons. So I think we did a lot of self-internal investigation and really kind of validation on why do people stay? Those that stay through the pandemic, what's driving them? How do we then, given the opportunity to really kind of rebuild, right? Giving that employee and their feedback, can we attract those people that really share the core values of the company and have them as our frontline ambassadors to help us getting to the people that we may or may not be able to get to. So in essence, it's really almost streamline who we are with the folks that kind of helped and survived with us along the way. And how do we build more of that? So that's one avenue we kind of look into. It's very specifically tailored to existing employees. From the new employee standpoint, very much alike, like Tom was mentioning earlier, is the whole employee experience. In our employee base, we have, in our company currently, we have 50% female, 50% male. 70% of our employees is, so to speak, diversity class, right? So, and each city, it's very different. So within the cities or the locations, we almost have their mini ecosystem. So we don't really want to just have a one blended model that fits all. It's kind of, there's some core values and strengths that we want to make sure that everyone is consistent with, but allow the local team to really kind of refine and define their ecosystem and the best way to recruit. A lot of our employees, we have high attrition rates. So the moment, it's easy to download an app, and it's also very easy to delete an app, right? So that's our challenge and the cycle of all the people that's coming into the company. So we've been really focused on what is the company values, and for that location, what drives the people that share the same value, and then also be very clear and upfront to them about the expectation in terms of what the job entails. And we've tried multiple different creative ways because, you rely on local recruiters or admin to deliver the message, and not all of them are created equal. So we've been trying to use the video, a couple 30 seconds, attention span for this generation is very short. So we have 10 to 20-second videos on, let me tell you what this job is, so you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And then from there this is the local family, this is who they stand for, this is how they link to the company, and have people do better job of vetting locally up front. And then you rely on the people that are there to really drive the local culture. I think we try to expand the experience and the level of experience through that local team. It's been working in certain areas, and other areas we got to refine a little bit, but we kind of approach it from some standardization through technology, give some local tools on best way, but then allow them to have the flexibility to find the right candidate. And some people get very creative, right? They can go after high schools. There's different work, age limit. You have to go beyond the normal channels because the normal traditional channels are drowning up, at least for us and what we experienced in the last 2 years.
No, I love that. Ayman, just getting what Ying is saying, so many different ways that companies are trying to reach out the right pool of people, or different pools of people to get people on board. So how are big players like you in the field that are trying to adjust for that? Because it's also challenging, not only for the final employer who is going to use the resource, but it's for the agencies as well, for the staffing industry in general. So how do you think that the industry is adapting to that reality?
Hey, that's a great question. I think both Tom and Ying shared some really insightful strategies or areas that they're working on. You mentioned the Great Resignation and how that's impacting everybody. What was encouraging to hear from both Tom and Ying is the focus on the user experience and the focus on the resignations happen, but it's happened to all of us. And what if it's taught us anything, it's that the focus on retention and retaining our people is as critical today, if not more, than it's ever been. And everybody's focused on attracting talent. And I think what we just heard is there's also some real good focus on retaining. And what that means, your onboarding programs today need to be better and more robust than they were pre-pandemic. Because you want the experience to come in. So Claudio, when you asked a question about what does it mean for the industry, that brand experience is critically important. Pre-pandemic, it was staffing agencies going out, going, hey, we can get you hired at this company. And the level of expertise or level of knowledge they had about the brand and what it meant to work at some of these companies maybe wasn't as critical as it is today. Today, all of us are trying to attract talent based on the value prop that we believe we can offer them once they are on board. And so staffing companies' ability to accurately and comprehensively explain the value prop of the clients that they're working for is critical today as it was in the past. And because of technology, that's done so many ways. You've heard the videos that have been used now versus just job postings that used to be out there on a board. The tech and how quickly and easily you can message someone's brand to a candidate absolutely impacts their experience. So we're starting to see now that the impact of the experience someone has starts much earlier than maybe we gave it credit for pre-pandemic, because every visual, every message, anything they see anywhere is part of that brand the company's trying to build. And staffing companies today, the better they can align and support the brand strategy that their customers have, we're seeing the better success they'll have in actually attracting talent for that specific client.
No, I like that. So one question, I want to go a little bit down right now. That is, what does it change in management? What does it change in management? We'll come to you later, Ayman, for big staff companies. But what changed in the way that you establish like your processes, your systems in organizations that need to manage like this whole new world? So let me start with you, Tom, and we go to Ying after.
Sure. Yeah, I would say the teaming required to make this all work now is very different than it was in the past. It's critical to be able to view the organization top down, right? And honestly, I think that's why you're seeing a lot of strategy and transformation organizations popping up in big companies. I mean, that's what the three of us do on a daily basis. We have teams focusing on how our organization works from end to end so that we can stitch together the requirements needed to actually make it happen. So you can think about this in simple terms using end-to-end process design. There's a lot of frameworks out there, but being able to articulate the user journey, the processes, and the technology that's required to make all of this work the right way, in this case, hiring and staffing, it helps define the ecosystem that we're playing in, right? So once you kind of know what the playing field looks like, it's a lot easier to figure out where you need to go. So for us, we've just figured out there's a startling amount of different functions and field teams that are in the process, right? I mean, from the outside in, you may not recognize that. So this meant we had to go out and talk to each and every one of them to understand how they experience the ecosystem differently, right? Because our field organization is saying, hey, we need you to fill these requisitions fast. I need qualified candidates, and I want visibility in the process so I know what's going on and how long it's going to take to get somebody to show up. Well, it's one thing to know that. It's another thing to design the process around that objective. And while there are other priorities from the talent acquisition team and other groups involved, that design is a balance of everyone else's input. And the ecosystem works when you understand the goals of each stakeholder, right? So that's really where we've probably spent the most time trying to figure this out.
Thank you, Tom. Ying, how is it for you? How do you see this transformation management in the way that you make the things happen to tackle this new situation, new context we are living?
Yeah, I think for us internally, we have made some organizational changes to really kind of adapt to some of it. I think the strategy team didn't really exist about a year and a half ago. So we now have one, to Tom, similar to the point that Tom is making. And it started with, a shop of 2. Now we have 12. So I think there's a lot of emphasis around how do we navigate just from an organization standpoint. And we also created a dedicated function for employee engagement. So there's more emphasis from a people perspective that we historically never really had. And now we have a group of folks, their sole job is to really focus on improving and really kind of evolve with the ecosystem, so to speak. And I think the other thing that we've really kind of refined our priorities and focus is this data. I think a lot of times we lose candidates in the process. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that, in the past, it doesn't matter, right? We have enough people in the pipeline, they flush through, and that's good. I think nowadays, every candidate is golden. You don't want to lose them. The last thing you want is they started, you spend all these upfront marketing and efforts to attract them in, and you lose them in the pipeline process. So we've really been very intentional from a speed to data standpoint, made a lot of investment, whether or not that's system or manpower in different ways, so that we know each candidate, and even as they exit, we attempted to call them to find out why do we lose them and where do we lose them to. I think that information, given all scheme of things, really helps drive productivity in some ways to figure out where do we focus. If this channel works, let's draw in as much as we can, drop all the other channel because it hasn't really panned out for us. And then the good candidate, candidate profile building, we spend a lot more effort in building the right profile. And if a good profile, we lose them, that's a very difficult conversation. We spend a lot of emphasis just to study the pipeline and the fallout rate during the pipeline and really kind of help us refine. So I think both from a technology data as well as the organization change and creating a dedicated function to focus on that has been our approach to this whole challenge that we have today.
That's amazing. That's fascinating. I love that. Yeah. Ayman, how is that for the big providers? I mean, what's changing management in the big providers? It's challenging, I would say, because you have right now a much more the demand is huge, the competition is huge, but the demands are narrowing, it's different right now. It's a different kind of request. It's more, as Ying and Tom said, more data-driven, driving the profile of people that would match the organization to be successful, the channels. How is that changing the staffing industry, the way they manage their clients, I'd say?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point, and there's obviously at a larger organizations, which are a lot of number of the ones that we help manage with their workforce strategy. You can get lost in thinking, because it's a big organization, there are different strategies. It comes down to, I think Tom may have mentioned this early on, it comes down to the user experience, and it comes down to how fast can you influence the user experience. That's probably where everybody is spending their time. You just heard Ying talk about, how fast the data that they've invested in, and can they understand where people are in the process quickly so they can influence that experience to get them on board. The larger organizations are just doing it in scale, and we're having to leverage technology a lot more. You're having to automate as much of the sourcing, pipeline filling process as you can, and you're having to figure out where can you put the human touch and the human element in people getting jobs. So as much as technology, and I live in this space, as much as it's exciting and keeps you motivated to do all this cool work, I would say, when people accept employment and jobs, it's very personal. It's still a very personal decision. And people, as much as we want to envision a world of, hey, you get on an app and you click a button and you take a job, while that's likely in our future, there's still a component of that human touch and that experience that has to be there. And so it's a balance, Claudio, when you ask of how the big companies are doing it, and not smaller, just other ones that maybe aren't considered your Fortune 100s or 500s. As long as we take an honest approach to how do we match technology with the human element of people getting jobs, and understand that this is a significant portion in their lives for all of us when you take a job, no matter what level of employees going into work. So learning how to manage that and having a good balance between the data and the human touch is critically important. So that's what we're talking about. And that's everything that we've been hearing: the user experience, the data, where do you invest in automating the process? All of that is, everybody's doing the same thing. It's just the ones that we're seeing have, what am I looking for? An advantage, or seeing success, are the ones that are striking a good balance of inputting that human interaction to enhance the experience.
Okay, no, I got it. Yeah, I have a question. Maybe we start with Ying this time. There's this big challenge. I mean, when you look like companies like ABM Industries, Unifi, they are big orchestrators of this whole, process, or the whole ecosystem to bring like employees to the field, and operate, So, and today we see that there are not only the challenge that we're talking here, but so many new technologies, new providers promising usage of data in a different way, or employee experience. So the HR tech industries feel it like with recruiting. Actually, it looks like 70 to 80% of HR tech is recruiting. So how do you choose like partners to your ecosystem? How do you make choice? Or we see some companies like pretty much like internalizing everything, but a lot of them are trying new things and testing new things. How is that with you? I will start with you, Ying, and I want to hear Tom as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting because we, over the last 3.5 years, actually went through 2 HRIS systems. Well, 3, including the legacy ones. So it's definitely been an interesting challenge. And we have yet to find the perfect solution. It's either it's great, but it doesn't integrate with any of the systems that we have existing in the other side of the business, or it's really good, all-inclusive system that fully integrates but provides very limited functionalities. So I think the best system you can do is to figure out the ones that works for the industries and the company. For us, it's a little bit unique. As I mentioned earlier, our system or our industry is in and around the airports. So for all of our majority of our employee has to go through a pretty elongated badging process. So for everyone that works at the airport, you have to go through the DOA and in some cases multiple layers of badging process. And that can take, depending on the size of the airport, somewhere between as quick as 3 days or all the way up to 6 weeks. And given the pandemic, that's not a really great situation for us to be in. And especially in this labor intense competition market, we lose more candidates than we ever have before in the onboarding process. Because if you think about it, for the same pay, you can start working at McDonald's tomorrow, or maybe even the day you applied. Us, we can't really afford to pay them while they wait, and it's 6 weeks down the road. So how do you keep engaging those folks in those 6 weeks time period in the most extreme case, and that they come in and clock in the day they're supposed to? So I think for us, the system and the partners that we've been picking are the ones that give us the most flexibility in terms of connectivity with the employee. So I think really go back to what we have, building the right employee profile, customized perhaps to that location. We spend a lot of time studying our internal employees than we ever have before to figure out, what's the right likelihood of the candidate actually be successful in that location, given the personality and the value systems within existing employee. Because the last thing we want to do is, we spend all these onboarding costs and effort and time and investment, and they start and they quit within the first week. And a lot of times when we do the exit interview, it's about either the job wasn't what I expected, or I got a better offer, which, in those cases, you really have limited control over that, or I didn't really like the team or the environment or the manager, right? So I think we know what we can control is the pay, perhaps in some cases, but what we can control is the culture fit for that location based on their employee profile and the flexibility in these systems to allow us to understand, get feedback, whether or not that's through text messaging or email or people call. I think we measure with the system capability to say how often do they respond to our text messages versus do they really pick up the phone when someone call. And then we engage them that way. So we kind of try to customize where we can, and the partner we're looking for is someone that's very flexible from that perspective.
No, that's great. So, Tom, how is it with you? I mean, so many solutions out there. How many providers? How is that reality for you? How do you decide bringing new companies or new solutions for your ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with Ying, right? There's this chasm between like super, great functionality and then like kind of enterprise software that kind of puts you in a box, and it can be hard to pick. And even when you do pick one, you're kind of saddled with the cons, I guess, of that particular solution. I would say 2 things. One is it's required us to add capabilities to our organization we didn't have before. So when you think about things like application development, really advanced technology architecture, and the ability to integrate systems internally in a way that can help bridge some of those gaps, that's been really critical for us, because there's a lot of really interesting solutions out there that just require an integration with some sort of enterprise software. But then beyond that, we still need to bring it up to a level where the applicant or one of our team members can actually consume that particular functionality. So I think building those technical capabilities internally is key to navigate this environment where, there really isn't a perfect solution out there for any one company. And, for us, it's always challenging. We are a highly distributed workforce. We're in, 10 to 20,000 locations across the country. They're not our facilities, right? It's not like McDonald's where you're walking into, a building where your brand is underneath, right? You're walking into a facility that somebody else is building, and you're trying to operate a business within that and perform a service. Is really, really challenging. So creating a digital connection with these team members is hard, even if you had the best technology in the world. So trying to figure out how to get to that point where they kind of feel like they're part of the organization, even though they don't step into a door that has the ABM logo on it, is really, I think that's our chief concern right now, is trying to figure that out and make sure we have a compelling reason for people to come back every day.
That's really interesting. So, for you, my question would be, because there is always like the situation of Tom and Ying, trying to decide which providers to bring the workforce. And at the end, you see many organizations, not all of them, but many of them having multiple providers together. So how do you see that in the vendor perspective? That is, how are you making an effort to integrate systems to lead with this uniqueness that each client is? So how is that organized? How do you decide for technology? Now, I remember I was in this field a few years ago. Every week there is the new technology coming that people believe that you disrupt the industry and nothing happens. How is it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. So a couple of things there, how do you manage the multiple vendors that you bring into, a company's ecosystem, right, around supplying? And it probably goes beyond just the vendors, but when you think about bringing an ecosystem together, you're looking for capabilities that enhance or complement what the other ones have. So that's what you're looking for. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 of you competing in the same space, it's not necessarily competing apples to apples. We build an ecosystem so that the collective whole provides what the customer is looking for. And that's challenging, to be fair, because it's challenging. The technology component of it, I think both Tom and Ying hit on. You need to make it easy to integrate and access the data that you have. And maybe more importantly, that you need to make it easy to understand the analytics and the information the data tells you. And that's the difficult part that we're seeing when you go through these integrations with all these companies. Some are very difficult to integrate with, which may just be a roadblock for them. And the other ones that are easy, the next step of that is, just because you can integrate, you need to have access to the data. The challenge that there is so many integrations out there and there's so much data, it can be very difficult to consume, and it can be very difficult to analyze, and it can be very difficult to say, what does that data help me? What decision does that data help me make? And so figuring out a strategy to help you do that, and to align the companies that you're bringing into your ecosystem, to align them to your strategy, whether that's 2, 3, 5 years, long-term, whatever it is critical. Ying's commented on it, HRIS systems. Nobody has found a dominant player in that space simply because of that, because it's difficult to connect them to a long-term strategy. They constantly meet kind of mid or short-term strategies, and then you find challenges and you move on to something else.
Yeah, no, I love that. A lot of people say that any company are become technology companies. I can see that reality happen here. You see what was only a human problem in the past, how to recruit, how to find them, it became like a technology problem as well. You need to integrate, you need to different vendors, you need to leverage, and the marketing as well. You need to attract these people, you need to market for them. It's much more holistic and difficult today. So going to the end of your session here, what I would like to hear is, suppose many players out there in the field that play standalone, they try to sell their solution out there, and are not successful as well because they don't have this ecosystem mentality. Right? Where do they amplify their presence in the whole system to support a company? Where the core area that they can make a difference in this whole process? How do they integrate, like Ayman was saying, their part with the organization. My question to you right now is, what would you suggest people in this field that could make a difference when they are trying to bring their solution to the field? What would you recommend these companies to be more effective playing in ecosystems? That's the general question. So I will start with you, Tom, and we go Ying, and we end with Ayman.
Yeah, so I'll add two things to the pile here. I'm sure Ying and Ayman will add more. One would be maybe just the earlier point around really mapping out the ecosystem. Like, you need to know the playing field. You have to understand the environment you're operating in, and you need to have a vision of where you want it to go, right? So it's one thing to kind of understand what the current state is, but what do you want it to be 3, 5, 10 years from now? And what are the things that you need to do to get there, right? So that would be number one. Number two would be, what now, like how do you actually execute on that, right? It's one thing to have a vision, but it's another thing to actually go and do it. And, this is where, Ying brought up before, the data analytics capabilities. We've been talking about our strategy capabilities and the way we execute on our transformations. I also think change management is just a huge component of this, right? Because we've been talking about technology a lot, and we've been talking about the human element of technology, but then there's the actual people that support the technology, right? And that tends to be some of the most challenging components of this whole process. Is there's somebody behind that technology that receives that, work order or that data request or what have you. And, we have to figure out how to make those processes better so the end users on both sides of it have a good experience, and the efficiencies are there that you set out to achieve by implementing technology in the first place. So those would be my recommendations, Claudio.
Ying, what would you add?
Yeah, I think what Tom said is spot on. It's very similar to kind of what I had in mind as well. I think the only thing I would add to that is, if you think about any ecosystem, it's really got 4 core elements. You got all the kind of the non-living portion, all the elements that creates the environment that's conducive for or has to be conducive for that particular ecosystem. And then you have the producers at the bottom that kind of initiates all the lifeblood of the ecosystem, which in our case is the candidates and the need to really continue to have hourly employee workforce, right? That's very different than a salary-based workforce. And then up further down up the chain, you have basically the consumer of the chain of the ecosystem, and then you have the decomposers that basically recreate the elements or contribute to the elements to do all of that. And I think in our environment, kind of putting things in those 4 buckets, the way I was thinking about it is, we got to figure out what ecosystem we're in today and what stage of the 4 categories. Because if you think about it, some categories are more mature and they're reaching a tipping point and they can completely change the ecosystem. And then the newcomers coming in, they can, again, add different elements. So I think understanding, kind of similar to what Tom is mentioning, mapping out what is the current stages of those ecosystems and how the behaviors are changing and which ones are about to reach a tipping point. And what I meant by that is, at which point would the hourly employee and the wage and all that benefit reach a point where the people that are a consumer of the ecosystem no longer have the appetite for it, right? So we got to balance that out. And sometimes we create unnecessary competitions amongst each other to kind of really changing or helping certain elements of ecosystem reaching that tipping point. That's very unnecessary. So we got to be smart about doing that. Some things are temporary, some things are more permanent. You got to weed out what's temporary, what's permanent, and really making any decisions based on addressing the present, but also build the foundation for the future. And I think that's something to be mindful, and it's something kind of hard lesson learned in the hard way through the last couple of years. But I think that's something we are paying a little bit more attention. And I think the consumer of the ecosystem is also appreciated a little bit better in the different ways. So that would be what I would add to that, understanding where you are and how you're contributing to the overall ecosystem, because we're all in this together.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, Ayman, what's your contribution here? I mean, what would you recommend to these companies trying to play in an ecosystem-based view of the system?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's tough. I think Tom and Ying described it really well. I think if you're your staffing company wanting to play in this ecosystem, like, how do you best support the biggest companies. I think your ability to be flexible and understand what problem you're really solving for the client, because clients are asking for, and I think we've heard it today in the time that we've been talking, we're looking for solutions to help us today. We need to get through the Great Recession. We need to get through the immediate post-pandemic. And we have a strategy on we need to address these problems going forward. And so companies that can align themselves to that value prop for us, companies that can say, I can help you with today because this is the value that I bring today. And I'm willing to evolve with you, or I'm willing to progress with you for what you need tomorrow, allows you to create an ecosystem that you can continue to move with you as you go forward, versus having to constantly replace people because they're good for you today, but they're not good for you tomorrow. So where that plays out and what that looks like is if you're willing to allow the value prop that you bring to the ecosystem to evolve as the ecosystem and your essentially your end client needs it. If you're willing to build an organization and be agile enough to go along that path, our belief is you're going to have a lot more success in the future, and you'll likely have long-term customers versus having to pop in and pop out based on a value that you provide. So it's the willingness of organizations today to understand who they are and what they provide today, and their willingness to understand that their value in the future may not be exactly the same, and their willingness to go along that path.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That's a great contribution. I mean, for me, a big conclusion is there are a lot of space, but people need to be open and collaborative in order to try to find out what's the best way to solve the clients, and solve the client. And I love your comment at the end, that is solve the problem of today and get together, to evolve together, for the future. I think that's a good kind of mindset that companies could use to help companies. That's great. So we are ending the panel right now. I want to thank you all for being here. So thank you, Ayman. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Ying. Thank you all that were watching this panel. I hope you can watch other panels that we are developing here in the business ecosystem discussions. Thank you.